was organised by a collection of Republican Socialists, trade unionists and people of progressive thinking. The Anti-Internment League is made up of people of various backgrounds, faiths, people of no faiths and people of no politics. But what we're all united under is to raise awareness of the fact that both the British and the Free State governments are pursuing totally unacceptable policies of internment against Republicans in our country. It's unacceptable and it has to stop now. There were people through the media and social media and other outlets who said that the people that support these men and women that are currently interned, they can fit them into a telephone box. Well, I'd like to see them get all us into a telephone box and eat. One thing I also want to say on behalf of the organisers, it's a great credit to all the groups and individuals that was involved that this event was pulled together in such a short pace of time. We've only had 6 to 7 weeks to organise this, but one thing you can be assured of, we've a whole year to organise next one, and it's going to be bigger and better than this all over again. 1971, who was tortured physically and psychologically by the British, and I'd like to ask him to read a statement here on behalf of the Free Martin Corey campaign. Let's see to get it on deck.
Good evening and well done everybody. It's turned out great tonight and proud of the way you've all behaved. I'm reading this statement out on behalf of Jim McElmurray, who looks after Martin's interest and is a close friend of Martin's. Unfortunately, Jim couldn't make it himself. Martin Corey is a 62-year-old man who served 19 years as a life in Long Case as a Republican prisoner. He was released by the prison authorities in 1992 and began to rebuild his life. He is a popular figure from a well-respected, hard-working family in Lurgan. It was a proud day for Martin when he was granted a loan to purchase his own mechanical digger. After a period of time, he gained a contract as a parish grave digger, covering several cemeteries in the Greater Lurgan area. Many people, including myself, will recall his compassionate approach and professionalism during times of family bereavement. In all the time I have known Martin, I have known his interest to be his family, his friends, his love of horse fishing, and of course his love of Ireland. All that came to a sad end on the 16th of April in 2010 when the police arrived at Martin's door in O'Neill Terrace and told him they had a warrant for his arrest. Martin was brought to the PSNI station in Lurgan and later transferred that day to McGabry prison. It was stated he had broke the terms of his licence release. When the solicitor asked to know what Martin was alleged to have done, he was told it was a matter of national security and subject to closed file information. For the past 3 years, solicitors and barristers have challenged his unlawful detention on numerous occasions in the High Court. On Monday the 9th of July 2012, the High Court Judge Justice Seamus Tracy, who has a background in European human rights courts, ordered Martin's immediate release, stating his human rights had been breached under sections 4 and 5 of the European Human Rights Act, and there were no charges which he should answer. Jim then waited for 4 hours outside McGabry with Martin's family, only to be told at 4:15 that day that the current Secretary of State, Englishman Owen Patterson, had overruled the High Court judge and blocked Martin's release. I was only 25 yards away from Martin when I received the call. I watched him step out of the prison van at the reception centre, and unfortunately had to watch him walk back into the van to be returned to the cell. As he got into the van, he paused, stared at me, and it's one of the hardest and cruelest moments that I've ever witnessed in my life. Martin has a legal entitlement to an annual parole review every 12 calendar months to re-evaluate the reasons for his continued internment. I have been accepted to speak on Martin's behalf at those parole hearings. However, every date that has been set for Martin's hearings in the last year has been followed by a cancellation by the parole committee, citing different circumstances each time. Martin has not received a parole review for almost 2 years now, and a legal action deemed by the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg that what they are doing with Martin now is illegally. We are currently awaiting a date to take his case to the High Court again for judicial review. Martin has been subject to a number of incidents during his time in internment. These include waiting over 3 weeks for emergency dental appointments, of which a vet would have a legal obligation to report a pet owner if he found an animal be kept in this manner for that period of time. Martin's request. That's right. Martin's request for a compassionate parole to attend his brother's funeral was denied by both the court and the prison service without any reason given. He was only granted leave to attend 1 hour before the service started, after a request was made to the Minister of Justice on humanitarian grounds. I myself have made 3 requests to the prison ombudsman to intervene in cases concerning material submitted by myself for Martin for use in his handicrafts. The prison staff either confiscated the printed image material or refused to provide them to Martin. On each of the 3 occasions, the prison ombudsman held a decision in Martin's favour, ruled against the Northern Ireland Prison Service, and determined the material must be given to Martin. Martin's case has been to the High Court several times in the past 3 years without finding any criminal offence to which he can be charged. If Martin had been charged with possession of a legal firearm at the time of his arrest, he would now possibly be free. There is no other name for his detention other than internment without trial. As a close friend of Martin's, I am in a better position than most to know if he is ever involved in any activity that could be deemed illegal or a threat to national security. A phrase often utilised by the faceless, nameless individuals in the courts. I can say without fear of contradiction that Martin is an innocent man. Everyone should make their voice heard and call upon the Secretary of State to bring charges against him or release him immediately. I speak to Martin every day on the telephone and visit him regularly in his internment. I can assure everyone that his spirits remain high in spite of his total lack of confidence in the judicial system and the statelet that is Northern Ireland. He wants to thank everyone for their contingent messages of support. We had a date to attend the High Court of Appeal in London, challenged his illegal detention last February. But the High Court in Belfast placed a block on our attendance, effectively stopping the case being heard by the Supreme Court. That killed any realistic possibility of getting the case into Europe. We have made an application to attend the European courts, but we're not allowed to exhaust until we exhaust every domestic court in the UK. Europe will then put us on the slow track, and it could be 3 to 4 years before the case is in front of him. Martin, as I said, is by law allowed a parole board review every 12 months, and he has not been granted one since August 2011. We are currently seeking a date in September for the parole board to sit, and I have been cleared once again to speak on Martin's behalf at the parole board. I visited Martin last week, and I left in 4 sheets of photographs for Martin and the other prisoners for use in their handicrafts. The prison officer refused to accept them due to the nature of the illustrations, he said. There were photographs of the 10 hunger strikers of 1981 and of the second victories of 1916. After a heated discussion with him, I requested to see his supervisor, and he would only accept them to pass them on to the security unit in the prison to study them. Still no acceptance of our culture and our traditions in Ireland. And they try to tell us things have changed. We're now living in a city of equals. I think we saw that tonight. I would like also to ask to go on to your website there of www.releasemartincorey.com and find out just exactly what is the situation with Martin. Just a few things I would like to hear say myself. That was, as I said, I read that on behalf of Jim McElmurray, who unfortunately couldn't make it here tonight. But generally when we speak about internment, we speak about the men. I now want to speak about the women. And talking of Martin earlier reminds me of Anne Devlin, who in 1803 spent 2.5 years in prison in Kilmainham jail with no charge like Martin. Her cell, which I visited only last month, was less than 3 feet wide. I could stand with my shoulder blades to one wall, reach out and touch the opposite wall. A stone floor and straw for bedding, no toilet. There was no cell door, there was a metal gate, there was no privacy. As well as Anne being imprisoned at that time without charge, her entire family were also imprisoned to try to get Anne to tell the authorities who financed Robert Emmet's rising. So I suppose saying all that, we can actually say that Anne Devlin was the first internee and also a woman. England has also interned Irish women in 1916 and again in 1918 through to 21. The Free State also interned Irish women 20. The Irish government also interned Irish women through 22 to 24. Again, once again in the 40s, Maggie Nolan, a Belfast girl here, spent 3 years in Holloway jail in England.
Maggie, please. We've had a Maggie day and a Maggie night. And Orangeism, which has had a stranglehold on this city and this society, had a mighty strike tonight. And fair play to you all for accomplishing that. It took a few hours, but under the leadership of the Anti-Internment League, and here I'd like to pay a particular gratitude to Dee Fennell and his stewards for the sturdy work that they carried out today, and I think they deserve a round of applause. It's a wee bit ironic, but 43 years ago, as a tender 16-year-old, I happened to be walking this road here. I had been camping holiday in South Hill in County Galway, and I'd met up with a Fianna lad from the Lower Falls, and when we heard about internment, we decided to get back to this city of Belfast to play our part in resistance against the forces of the crown. We had a very eventful week. I don't want to go into it here now, but we played our part. And my parents, God bless them, they said, at least our people would be rioting in Galway. Little did they know. However, on a serious note, every Democrat throughout the world recognises and acknowledges that internment, imprisonment without trial, is a basic human rights infringement. And yet, this ugly little statement, which was formed in the 1920s, has managed to use internment in every decade leading up to 1971, this anniversary tonight. Brian Faulkner, the last Unionist Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, or Ulster, decided to use internment once again to try to smash our innocent people. Over 300 men were taken from their homes. They were taken into helicopters and then thrown from the air, blindfolded, relentlessly beaten by British forces, RUC men and screws, and 12 of them, the infamous 12-footed men, were brutally and psychologically tortured. Britain is perfidious Albion, and perfidious Albion always gets by. And today, 42 years on, we still have internment, but they use a different type of employment. No longer are hundreds of men and women imprisoned. Instead, in Divis fashion, they carefully select those that they wish to punish. They want to punish the men and women, Republican men and women. They want to punish their families, their loved ones, their communities. The struggle of the women in this country as well. I'd like to introduce our main speaker, Angela Nelson.
42 years ago, on August the 9th, 1971, the Unionist regime at Stormont with the full knowledge and assistance of the British government, reintroduced internment without trial in the 6 counties. 1971 was not the first time internment without trial has been used in the 6 counties. Since partition, it was previously used in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s and in the early 60s. And the period in between the reintroduction of internment in August in 71 and the ending of internment in December 1975, almost 2,000 men and women were imprisoned without charge and without trial in the 6 counties. No single decision made by the British government in Ireland did more to violate human rights and to escalate the conflict in the 6 counties than the decision to impose internment without trial. The early morning raids during the first waves of the internment swoops were accompanied by widespread British Army and RUC brutality, assaults on people, wrecking of homes and many shootings. A number of those arrested in the initial and subsequent internment swoops were subjected to torture, interrogation centres and British Army barracks. Techniques used including blindfolding and throwing from helicopters prisoners who believed they were hundreds of feet in the air, making prisoners run through broken glass in their bare feet, white noise and other sensory deprivation methods, forcing prisoners to stand for hours, spread-eagled against walls and physical beatings. The European Commission of Human Rights ruled in 1976 that the British authorities were guilty of torture and inhuman and degrading treatment. That was not the sole outcome of the brutalities that accompanied internment. In the Ballymurphy area of this city, British paratroopers shot dead 11 innocent civilians in the 3 days after internment was imposed. Less than 6 months later, in January 1972, these same British paratroopers returned to the streets of another Irish city, where they shot dead 13 people, taking part in an anti-internment march and rally in Derry, and a 14th person died later of their injuries. But it should not be assumed that internment is somehow a specifically British solution to an Irish problem. Virtually every country in the world has repressive legislation on its statute books, and the jails of many lands are filled with prisoners who are not charged with any crime other than opposition to the regime in power, and who are never likely to come to trial. Nor is torture, brutality, or plain old-fashioned ill-treatment the sole prerogative of the British state. Internment without trial is practiced by the USA in Guantanamo Bay, in Afghanistan or Iraq. Israel holds many Palestinian prisoners without charge or trial. Almost 4 decades, the British state power has also exercised a punitive system of imprisonment against those politically disaffected from the 6 county state through the use of a process known as internment by remand. Under this process of internment by remand, political activists are today arrested, held and questioned in a special interrogation centre, Antrim Holding Centre, charged with various offences and then remanded in custody. Evidence shows that those held under this process can be held in prison for extended periods of time, which in a number of cases have lasted for up to 3 years, only to be eventually released at either the trial or the immediate pre-trial stage due to A, a lack of evidence, B, the charges are withdrawn by the prosecution authorities, or C, no evidence is found to substantiate the charges. Internment by remand was previously used in the 6 counties by the British state during the 1970s, 1980s and the 1990s. This replaced the process of internment without trial, which the British introduced in August 71 and which lasted to 75. The use of internment without trial was abandoned by the British due to the widespread opposition in Ireland to its use and international condemnation. Britain for the denial of basic legal rights to those detained. Internment by remand is merely a more subtle and insidious form of internment. It is not a new invention, given that as a process, internment by remand commenced as a planned strategy in the late 1970s. Britain would claim that this was part of a legitimate legal process, as unlike internment without trial, persons faced charges, court appearances and the possibility of a conviction at trial some far off future date. Furthermore, as this strategy of internment by remand also involves the prosecution service, the judiciary and the wider legal system, Britain could respond to critics of the system and direct justifiable censure by claiming that due process must take its course. That, of course, was the illusion. The reality was that men and women were arrested, charged, remanded in custody, with many being eventually released 1 year, 18 months or 2 years later when it was found that the charges could not be substantiated. Nevertheless, the strategy of internment by remand allowed Britain to remove political opponents and key activists for protracted periods of time. Despite various changes to the legal and judicial system in the 6 counties in recent years, the system of internment by remand still continues in use to this day. Indeed, some of those who were previously critical opponents of internment by remand and who represented victims of that process are today integral parts of the prosecution and judicial system which implements the system. Similarly, those who were previously politically opposed to internment by remand and who were themselves the victims of that process are today remarkably silent on its continued operation in the 6 counties. Various international conventions dictate that a person is entitled to a trial within the shortest possible time. Furthermore, those same international conventions advise in view of both the presumption of innocence and the presumption in favour of liberty, that the remand of persons in custody should be the exception rather than the norm. Additionally, international conventions also suggest that in order to avoid inappropriate use of remand in custody, the widest possible range of alternative, less restrictive measures shall be made available. Yet, when it comes to dealing with persons who form part of the political opposition to the status quo in the 6 counties, these internationally accepted rulings and guidance are continuously and flaunted and ignored. Holding someone in remand in prison for up to 3 years only for that person to have the charges finally withdrawn or to have a court exculpate that person is most certainly not in keeping with the intent of those conventions. Internment by remand as a corrupt practice is made more insidious as it is often based upon trumped up and spurious charges with little or no substantial evidence to even remotely substantiate such charges in the first place. Nevertheless, the judicial, prosecution, policing and political systems within the 6 counties all willingly, unquestionably collude in supporting this unjust practice. This collective defence of an unjust system by those in positions of power does not make that system any less unjust. nor does the fact that only scores of people, rather than hundreds or thousands, are affected, make the injustice any less severe. On the contrary, it is exactly such circumstances that permit those in power to gradually and incrementally increase the violations of an individual's human rights and civil liberties. As those violations of human rights and civil liberties begin to increase, the number of those directly affected also increases until it reaches a stage when people ask, how did this happen? By then, it's too late. Don't wait until internment by remand impacts upon one of your neighbours, friends or relatives. Speak out now. And remember, they may chain our hands and feet, but the spirit of freedom cannot be shackled.
All it means to say thank you to everyone. I want to pay particular tribute to everyone for maintaining their discipline in the face of PSNI provocation and stalling tactics both at North Queen Street and at Carrick Hill. I think everyone deserves a big round of applause for maintaining their discipline and holding the line there. The organisers of this event promised people at the beginning of this event, hours and hours ago, in Ardoyne Avenue, outside the Shamrock Club, that we would get people here tonight, that we would march through that town, and we did it, and we did it successfully, and it's a great example of how unity can only further benefit in terms of wider issues as well. And just a couple of announcements. The Greater Ardoyne Residents Collective are having a protest against the unwanted apprentice boys sectarian march in the morning, and they're asking, can all residents and supporters assemble at 7:30 a.m. at the Ardoyne, at the front of the houses or on the Ardoyne and Crumlin roads. On Sunday there's an event for Seamus Morris and Peter Nolan, who were both assassinated and as a result of collusion by a lawless death squad 25 years ago on the 8th of August 1988. And that flag unveil is organised by friends and family of the two men, and it's at 1 o'clock on Sunday at the bottom of Brubham Park. And also finally, as Ashley touched on, the Ballymurphy Massacre Truth and Justice March assembles at 1:30 at Springfield Park on Sunday here, and everyone's welcome. So thank you everyone for coming. It's been a great display of solidarity to the men and women currently in town. It's going to be the mail, but somebody are that.